Welcome to the third and final day of the Urgency Intensive Intergovernmental Panel on Art and Climate Change. The journey, as you saw, was a bit bumpy, but thank you, Arvid and Mahi, for bringing us to a point outside of time. Today, we gathered two different times, but for the past 2 days, starting on last Thursday, we are also bringing a lot of the concepts and questions that were brought on the table. So for this second edition of the Urgency Intensive, we are proposing the IPACC, the Intergovernmental Panel on Art and Climate Change, as an object for discussion that could possibly allow us to explore further the role and civic agency of art in relation to climate change and environmental breakdown. It's also an object of discussion that could allow us to explore concepts such as long-term thinking and intergenerational accountability. This exercise, as I said, started on Thursday, where through a series of presentations and conversations, we try to think how we can rethink core aspects of our society, communities, and also institutions in order to secure the long-term thriving of our planet. And we try to understand what is the role of art within that process. Yesterday, on the second day, we had two different roundtables, each one in its own time. We had a group of professionals gathering in the present to discuss the possibility of creation of this IPACC. And in the afternoon, we had a group 7 generations ahead in the future, in 2161, looking retrospectively at what the IPACC has done, what it has succeeded, and what were its failures. This system of discussion is inspired by the policymaking and design strategy and conversation strategy of future design that has been used by Japanese researchers and was founded by Professor Tatsuyoshi Saijo. And today, the third and final day, we are taking the final step of the future design methodology, which is bringing present and future together in a discussion. But as I said, we're also bringing a set of questions and comments that both our speakers and also our audience online have expressed. From IPACC to the PPACC, as Dr. Yoba Sokono suggested in the first day, why not a people panel on art and climate change? Is an institutional structure such as the IPCC appropriate to convey the importance of artistic imaginary in the action on climate emergency? What are the inherent legacies and biases of such structure? We defended art as research in its own right, something which is not there to illustrate or communicate the scientists' research. We discussed the responsibility of the individual and those of institutions. Institutions are made by individuals. In the 7th generation principle, or in future design, is it possible to include animals, plants, geology, and others without only thinking about the benefits for the humans? The recognition of the rights of nature is a growing global movement. Canada just announced the granting of legal personhood to the Magpie River. There are already cases in the Canadian courts where there have been songs, stories, and other cultural expressions approved as proofs of land claims. How can we reward short-term thinking in ways that have long-term impacts? Who pays the price when some are dreaming about the future? The question is not only how can art contribute to mitigating the impact of climate change, but also how has art contributed so far to global warming? Not only by travel, transport, and production, but through aesthetics and concepts. When and where is the art system complicit with the current thermo-capitalism? Do we need an art for climate justice charter? Interconnecting local initiatives without burdening them and creating a shared platform of demands to transform the art world. Do we need a list of demands? We discussed the idea of embedding an artist or artists within the IPCC. Will artists be consultants? Should we look back at the artist placement group, for example? Who is the commissioner? Who are the cultural producers? What is their expertise? We could move away from the notion of art as an outcome and swap that for art as an adjective that modifies depending on the context and purpose. What do we want to change? What do we want to communicate? What do we want to translate? What should remain opaque? It's my pleasure to co-curate this event with Inga Latte, who is currently CMAP Central and Eastern Europe Fellow at MoMA and has been a curator at the Latvian Center for Contemporary Art since 2012. Hi Inga, welcome to A Point Outside of Time.
Hi Bruno, and hi everyone else. Yeah, I'm super happy and excited to be here in our third day of this event. And so just to also wrap up some of my own reflection on the past 2 days, like I feel we've had layers and depths added to the concepts and ideas we're discussing through each of the sessions, through live and different chats and breakout rooms, which is a beautiful thing of this format, which is what we are left with today and these days. We've also managed to establish and deepen many arguments, I feel, of why art and culture has a role to play in the discussion of the climate crisis, from the perspective of individuals, the institutions, as well as the collective we, which we also heard the future generation come to forward with us. However, for the art and culture to actually play this role, we also feel that we've come back to this idea that the art and its environment and its systems have to change themselves very much in order to become more inclusive, more open, somehow different themselves. And we heard from the future generation that it will happen and it's sort of inevitable. So let's see. And maybe this crisis is also a moment where we will see how it happens and how it unfolds. And so among many art scenes and many ideas of what the role of art is in society, also the idea of its relationship and importance to public health or within this well-being health of society has also come to the fore. The ideas of the notions of joy and pleasure, which makes us come together and which can actually inspire us for action, for activism, like that seemed also really important. So certain kind of optimism. And to refer to some of the speakers of yesterday, so we should be really working with the present instead of colonizing the future, like relying on the future as in like in 140 years something will magically fix itself. And also, like if we are disencouraged of the governments or corporations or many other seemingly abstract, but of course very real bodies that are keeping these kind of old systems of power in place. So if we're in discouragement that they would ever change, we also have to realize that they're also made of people. So that is another thing that seems important. And finally, more towards practical solutions. It is important to bring those discussions that we're having here also outside the more or less all agreeing bodies we here represent. And then it's a question how to do it and how to involve other actors who don't necessarily agree with us. And then how do we work with smaller institutions also, and how do we elevate and let their voice be heard, but without overburdening them with certain kind of engagement in an intergovernmental body or whichever we sort of would potentially create, right? And so having that in mind, I'm really happy to open this meeting between the present and the future, where we will have, so the present is moderated by Taru Elfving, and we have Fernando García-Dory, Nataša Petrešin-Bachelez, and Suzanne Dhaliwal there, and the future moderated by Prem Krishnamurthy, holds Ama, Josephine, Budge, Julieta, Aranda, and Pauliina Feodoroff as its participants. So without further ado, I'm opening the floor to their reflections.
Thank you, Inga. Can we have the kind of whole of the present group maybe sort of here together on now? I think Inga is, I'm only seeing Inga here now rather than the other present group.
I see everyone.
Okay.
Hi. Yeah.
Okay, here we are. Yeah. Should we have the Suzanne and Fernando here as well then? Yes, here we go.
No, yes, Suzanne.
Okay. This is quite a task for us to kind of try to sort of somehow synthesize or bring some of the kind of a core questions and thoughts forward to today from yesterday or for the last 2 days. So much has been discussed, so many really crucially important things have been raised, and Bruno and Inga really beautifully actually captured a lot of that now in the introduction, so I think we'll be kind of actually repeating and going hopefully deeper into some of these questions that were raised in the introduction. We would like to start by our present groups kind of responding to the future group and sort of to raise some of the points that were kind of, were really powerful for us, or kind of seem to really kind of feed our thought on what should we do in the present, or how do we kind of rethink, these challenges in the present. And just to kind of start with really briefly, what really kind of what stayed with me as a more sort of general point from the future was the shift from the I to we. So the kind of meaningful unit to think with would be we in the future, and the different we's. So the kind of collectivizing, interdependency, alliances that we also discussed a lot yesterday as a kind of really fundamental starting point. And the other thing is the question of art, the kind of sort of the thought that in the future, in 7 generations, whatever may be considered art is something that is totally beyond our grasp today. A lot of discussions now get stuck with the notion of what is art and what can art do within the particular Western modernity and its understanding of art, which in itself is a kind of historical and quite a young conception of art and culture or creative practice. And so for us to be able to move forward, we need to let go of that sense of kind of boundary making, also in terms of what we recognize as art today, and to open up towards all those sort of other forms of creative practice that may become crucial for us to kind of move forward in response to climate crisis. And one more point that kind of relates to this, it's a more general point that came up in the questions and the discussions. It's also the question of the shift of question from can art have a role in response to climate crisis and ecological breakdown? So to say, can art not have a role in this? Art has a role anyway, whether we take that role actively or not as part of that. And I think that's a kind of something as a wider framework that we're thinking within. But I would like to now pass on to our other members in the present, that they could respond to some of the things that we learned from the future yesterday. So who wants to go first? I'm being very democratic here.
Yeah, I can start. Yeah, so hearing from the future yesterday, there's a phrase that has been echoing ever since I heard it, to let the land affect you, to be moved by the land and to be changed. And it's literally been circulating in terms of thinking about the fact that even if I won't be in the future, the thing that connects me to the future is the land and the mountains that are outside today, and that they will be still there. And however much we can, from science and from all of the different scenarios, we can take this information, but that the core source of information is going to be the land. And so to stay in relationship, and sometimes that work of staying in relationship, to be in our biophilia, in our love of the land, and in our bionosis, and knowledge from being in relationship to the land, that is a pathway to the future. So sometimes when we think of the future, it can fill us with dread, but it was also really reassuring to get this message that the work that we're doing to stay connected, to stay in relationship, is just as important as the political work and the resistance work. And the other thing that I heard was the sense of joy and the sense of play as well, and that would get us there. And so this morning I spent some time with some children, and they showed me how to eat the insides of urchins, and just hearing the traditional ecological knowledge that children have in play. And so that was really reassuring as well. And when I think about what the kind of art research centre that we could have as we move into the future, another thing that I heard was the need for cumulative impact assessments, however unexciting that might sound, but that work of research, of bearing witness, of continually being in the present and gathering that evidence and working together across the disciplines, if that means documenting the changes that we see, the skills that we have to document the sounds, the air pollution, the change in all of those things, and how we can work together. That really gave me that vision, something that you said, Taru, there, that we know we need art, and while we can question what that's going to look like, that we continually ground ourselves in what we call in Sikhism is seva, which is service, that the art that we make is in service to the communities around us and as well as in the future. So I feel really grateful to the future. Thank you for, as well as urging us to get off our butts and to keep that work going, but also to reassure us that the relationships, the interdisciplinary work, and the individual joy has a role in getting us there too. So thank you for that. I'm going to pass to Nataša or Fernando.
Thank you,
Suzanne. Thank you, Taru. I would like to start with the full moon that was there this night, and that affects dearly and deeply my life every month. Not only because of I can connect to in that to the, let's say, universal rhythms, and just like what Suzanne was saying, that, you know, as with the land and with mountains, we know that they will be there when we are gone. We also know that these universal rhythms will be there. And I had, so that's on one side, and on another side is I'm, as a woman and with my cycles, I'm very connected to that as well. I also have a chronic disease that makes my life really a nightmare whenever this happens. So, so the full moon is really very strong element, very much present in my life. And I actually decided to incorporate that element for my biennial that I did 2 years ago in Belgium, where the public events were actually happening at specific moon cycles. So, and we tried to imagine what kind of energies happened there. But not only that, I had a dream, and this is in relation to our exchanges yesterday between the present and the future generation. So I had a dream tonight that I was in some weird space time where I was touching. It was almost like there would be some kind of drawers, and I understood from when I touched the drawers that they were opening up, that I was opening up different futures. And this is something that I got yesterday from the presentations of the future generation, and I'd like to thank them all, is that actually there is not still, we should not be thinking about one future, there are many futures in plural. And so as there are many I's and we that become we's, there are also many futures that we can still have an impact on at this very moment now. And so I think that was very beautiful, and it relates to how I see that we could maybe formulate together with the present and future generation and all the comments that were gathered here, is that we could think maybe of a form for the message that we want to bring, let's say, either to IPCC or just to have a message now that we want to think about and mediate to the potential futures that there are, in a form of the seed, because the seed or a grain is that kind of, or an egg, is that kind of space and time of a potentiality that has all the information that needs to become something, that, you know, all the genetics is there. It needs care, it needs time, it needs specific conditions in which it can blossom, it can grow. So let's say that this, not only a metaphor, it's a real thing, it's a real, let's say it's an element that really depends on us in the present in order that we can activate it in the future. So the seed banks are obviously that kind of element where we see how from present we can actually be in communication with our immediate and more distant future. So this is something I have been very very moved by, and also what was already said, that actually we should already understand that the role of art, that the art has already its role, that we should stop asking the question, could art have a role, and what kind of role would it be? Because it has already. It just has to be highlighted, and it has to be educated, mediated to the coming generations that are already there, in schools, in kindergartens, coming to become then students, etc. That art is a form of commoning, of civic engagement, of coming together, of something that can mediate what friendship means, what laughter means, what well-being means, and especially what critical reflexivity means, because this is where art is the most strong. And I on purpose talk about here with art with a big A, because it contains for me both the thought, all kinds of different disciplines. It's actually the art of, as Kati Tutayasu says, it's the art of living. That's actually art as well. Did I have any other? Well, as Suzanne said, "Let the Land Change You" was a moment when my emotions were at the peak, and I would also say that through art we also can think of what it really means and how we have to transform the idea of human, and how human is interdependent with its non-human worlds that envelop it.
Thank you, Nataša. Fernando?
Thank you. Yes, it was a great opportunity to have this message from the future. I have to say that also maybe the time gap and the technological and mindset gap made me sometimes a bit difficult to apprehend the whole message they were conveying to us. But I understood that the main question, I mean, if we think on the seed and this idea of reconnection with the land, is about like that engagement, and that the seed is also like a vehicle that comes from the past, from the other ancestors. So it's like a timeline, and it's not the seed only, it's also the, let's say, the genetic legacy of domestication. So it's also to understand that we are in this planet in a relation of, let's say, co-responsibility, you know, and custodianship, and that involve us in the everyday. So just because I think that sometimes, considering our societies and in the so-called developed countries, almost 98% of the population, or it's well, dedicated to activities beyond the connection with the land in the everyday, and just less than 2% that involves sometimes a notion of also let's say a reification of nature as something to contemplate, you know, and something detached from other, let's say, more metabolic relations that are very needed to look at and to engage and to redesign and to rethink. So if we would take that from the future, they were telling us that there were transformations in the art system. Maybe it's something that we could start to think is like, what would be the cultural process that makes those transformations to happen, like in relation to understanding how art could be more sensible and accompanying not the necessary change to prepare us with this ecological crisis. So learning and thinking of movements that we have seen coming in the last years, no, like Me Too, Black Lives Matter, and how they effectively are, no, like making clear, making a central point, no, that is that we cannot like avoid or leave behind anymore, leave aside. So it would be interesting to think how there could be a polyphony of different views, no, to make this to be also a central question in how the art world functions. We'll leave it there, and then we can discuss more together.
Thank you. And I think just before passing on to the future group, we would like to restate what Nataša was also referring to here, that we'd really like to think with you the future of what should we do now, and how do we start actually acting upon these thoughts of ours, and how do we start moving, you know, what could we do now in relation to this this sort of proposal of the kind of IPACC or People's Panel. What could this be, and what kind of form could it take? That I would like to pass on to the future group now.
We thank you. We thank you from the present group, and now we would ask the entire future group to also join on the stage. May we bring us all up onto the stage. We are almost all here. We would ask the future group first, do we prefer to be here only as the group of 2161, or do we prefer all of us to look each other in these things called eyes?
Yeah! Yes! We think it would be good to share some of the currents and murmurings that have been happening in this river, and then commune together. What are thoughts? Yeah.
We agree. Shh. Should we frame, or we?
Yeah, go ahead.
As is clear, and as we are glad to hear that the present has already apprehended, there is not one future. There are many futures. We are many we's. We have different voices, and this we will state some points, but we may not get it all right. There is no right. So we encourage the other we's to also disagree. But we see in the communication from the present to the future and back to the past, at least 3 levels on which we want to send some communications and messages your way. What we see is first a question of the role of art, which the present has also acknowledged. We see that this thing that was called in 2021 art, it has changed quite greatly by 2161. It is no longer this limited field, this elite plaything, this act of spectacle, this act of capital. It is many other things. It is perhaps a way of listening and learning and digesting and speaking and communing and loving. It is all of these and more. In your time, it was maybe still useful on 3 levels that this particular we sees. Perhaps as a source of individual liberation for each we. Second, as a form of communing between many we's through the pleasure that and complexity that this thing called art could produce in your time. And third, as a way to speak to those powerful we's who, in your past, had more influence on the systems and structures and superstructures of the world than any of the other we's in the world. Though that is no longer the case, or not to such a degree in our time, we understand that to be a great problem. But we will leave it at that, and for other we's in this group to also comment. The first point being the role of art in 2021 versus 2161. The second, as we see it, is the role of art in the IPCC and the newly founded IPACC. We have heard what these groups were in their founding, how they conceived of knowledge, knowledge is, how they thought about science, and how they thought about these things reaching other we's. We must ask, what are the roles that those we's that we called artists in your past, what roles must they play? And how might we make this happen? The roles that artists, those people called artists, might play in these organizations in 2021. So I hope that within our group, we can also reflect upon that. The third level, as we see it, is the role of care, the role of joy, the role of loss, and the role of being tired. Some of us in the future are tired, very tired. Why must the past always come to us for the answers? Why must we tell you how to be? Why is this the job of the future, which sometimes looks different from those of the past, or those who have brought the past and future together to tell us what to do for us? So some of us may want to talk more about the question of care, but also of joy. With these words, I will stop and I will ask the other we's if they would join in their polyphony of voices. So now I invite the other future we's to please add if they would like.
We will use your term of addressment I for the ease of translation. I would like to begin with care and pleasure. That's because histories and cosmologies that do not begin with care and pleasure, and by care and pleasure, I mean not the care and pleasure of the one or the few, but the care and pleasure of the collective, of the ecology, and not the care and pleasure of one at the expense of all others. Histories and cosmologies that do not center and begin with care and pleasure have created the now you are currently inhabiting and contributing to. And we have had a conversation before about extraction and the expectation on the future and on certain particular racialized bodies in your present to provide answers. What does it mean to invite artists into the IPCC? What does it mean to invite artists of color, Indigenous, Black, and Brown artists into a hostile environment? And how are they supposed to survive that environment? How is that neoliberal gesture towards inclusion not a repetition of extraction, appropriation, and sacrifice? These are questions we feel the IPACC has to be closely centering and concerned with. Which are the bodies that can act as shields, as accomplices, and which are the voices that need to be centered and listened to, but in environments of care and beauty and pleasure and joy? And how can funds be reappropriated from large state actors to support that pleasure and joy, not just of these artists, but of their loved ones, their collectives, their communities, their ecologies? Only from this place can anything different be built in the future, through such bodies as the IPCC and the IPACC, I believe.
To build up on what Amma was saying, I think that it's worth examining the current construction of the field that we inhabit as artists and creators, and to accept that it's actually, like in your present in 2021, it is the perfect neoliberal construct. And the artist is the perfect neoliberal subject, atomized, moving alone, free agent, in constant competition with others in her field. Same goes for curators. So when we are basically following what I call a gladiator model, where we are ready to cut the floor from underneath each other, how are we then laying any kind of high claims to being able to fix real large social issues? So the point that I would want to make is that as one is thinking about fixing these larger issues or addressing them or being there for them, bearing witness, registering the images that need to be registered, which is something that I will get to later, an immense amount of care should be paid to the current structure of our field, which is, I mean, there's no accident to arts being the gentrifiers par excellence, that we are this gentrifying force because we inhabit that role. So how do you want to get out of that? In order to fix the future, you need to get out of that. In order to be able to make the images and register the images and be the kind of lens that will carry that register and produce not just illustrations for papers or greenwashing, but actually the images that need to make an effect and that need to be produced, the field needs to be restructured completely. That's my piece.
Pauliina,
You're muted.
your we is muted.
Thank you. And to conclude from our ways to the fellow futures, from your point of view, our beloved ancestors of fellow nations. Yesterday, we gave you a quick view what were the changes that led to our current situation. Now we provide you more accurate information about the structural changes the new roles started to have, combining art knowledge into scientific knowledge and indigenous knowledge, and how this complete ways of knowing started to shift human approach to more interconnected understanding of the living being of the whole planet, how all the fellowships, how all kings around you are living. And by the time of the April 2001, have we understood correctly, was it April or May 2001, when the IPCC started to have first negotiations with IPACC, building a body and organ with the science, artists and indigenous peoples. The first steps that were created was in your now, our beloved ancestors, what you used to call by BIPOC, people of color, people of different sexualities. We don't use those terms any longer. But in that structural sense, you created a separate body for them, you secured funds for them, you secured a time frame for them to find out a way to navigate in that very hostile environment, that they would have a time to build up their own strategies in an environment that has been for centuries and centuries being built, targeting for extracting them. When their us started to get stronger and better, and the alliance of that started to get better and stronger, their list of demands was created and carried out all the current organizations of your current, our past. And your ancestors, our ancestors, realized their own positions within the arts hierarchy, within the arts power, within the arts different kind of ways of having networking. And they started to spread out that message that was built together, the list of demands that was built together with artists, scientists, and indigenous knowledge holders. And that passing took by the storm. And that breakthrough way of building those workshops and working models that were based on care, and as other of our we's told you, that we started to bring our beloved ones with us. It was a creation of new global families that had deep roots in local communities. And that kind of a network of support, hard labor, and love started to shift the balances and the questions that were asked, not only the goals, but also the tools, the routes, how we do the things. And we don't use in our present time any longer of those terms. So we apologize for the inaccuracies because we don't look so much back anymore. But you are able to use your current technology to transmit more accurate questions for us, if interested, of learning the process, how these 140 years evolved the way.
Thank you. We are moved. Thank you, all we's from 2161. Thank you. And now I believe we are ready to move to a time outside of time and meet with the we's from the present.
Thank you. Future. Who is somebody in our group who would like to respond right away from these many presents that we also represent?
Yeah, we could start. I think first an expression of gratitude for naming something that is often the elephant in the room in these spaces in 2021. We're still coping with it, which is the replication of oppression and white supremacy within the arts that we're trying to challenge within the wider world. So a gratitude for calling that to attention and to recenter us that, while we are at the beginnings of designing something like this, that we have to make sure that those of us who have been systemically marginalized have the resources and the support and the care to even do that work. So I think that's an incredible call to action, because it's something that's thought to do afterwards. We're brought on to sprinkle and add diversity, add color and stir. But what does it really, really look like to have that at the center? And how does that look like moving forward? And how does that translate into the research and the healing that many of us need to do to even be able to participate in this work? While our communities have been most hit by COVID, we've been most hit by the climate crisis. And also, we are most asked to bring our intelligence and to translate that for everyone. So deep gratitude from the future for bringing that elephant forward.
Thank you also from my side. I'm very grateful for all the polyphonic voices that we could hear in each of yours and your messages, and also what I would like to take from here. I believe that each of you, each of the potential futures were presented in a way that already led our first present group feedback actually back to us. What I felt very strongly was the tiredness that you mentioned. So why always coming to in the present? It's so often, right, to the most vulnerable, most racial, like the racialized groups that are the most vulnerable, with the questions, with the expectations that they will be the ones to provide all the questions. And the feeling of exhaustion from the future is quite present. So thank you for that, because it means that it's really the work really starts here and now, and already in respect to our past and the generations that are already here with us and that are a little bit younger than ourselves. So thank you for that.
I guess I could ask a further question that kind of goes back to what Pauliina Caicedo was talking about. seems like aeons ago now. This conversation seems to have been going on for a number of generations. And she mentioned this sort of extraction of knowledge and how we have to move away from extractive practices also in terms of extraction of knowledge, and how she talked about the extraction of knowledge from our bodies, the territories and our bodies, and how that sort of intergenerational knowledge is being lost in that process. But kind of focusing maybe more on the question of extraction of knowledge, and what I also feel that resonates with this question of who is asked to provide the answers, who do we turn to but also in the environmental movement to the indigenous, as kind of in the West, we've kind of lost that knowledge. There's a recognition that there are some in the world who have that, a different sense of relation to the rest of the living world. And there are definitely very extractivist tendencies in the arts as well in relation to this now, on kind of how to, ask for, that what we don't have, and expecting to, that this is, of course, for common good, without recognizing the kind of repetition of this or reinforcement of particular power structures. So I guess I would, maybe from here to kind of go towards the question of concrete, what do we do? How do we begin to formulate and form steps forward to change? How to start creating this sort of space that is not extractivist? How to, what Pauliina and Anna were referring to, of this kind of spaces of safe spaces where you don't have to become the token, or the kind of, but actually can create communities and a voice without having to, without this sense of being kind of absorbed into and included within existing structures without actually possibility of changing them. But how in that process also to avoid the kind of those already in power and having the loud voice and having those sort of access to power within the existing structures to kind of actually hijack that momentum and actually kind of define and determine the kind of those ways that we will move forward. Let's say in relation to, for example, this sort of collaboration with IPCC or something similar in relation to kind of response to ecological crises.
Can I intervene?
Yeah.
I want to take away some of the labour from the future. Let you pause for a bit, and I hope I represent this right. But I just want to see something that came in the chat from Amma. Was first to remember that knowledge was not lost. It was forcibly eradicated, extracted from, violated, and continues to be. And I think this is something that Amma said to us yesterday as well, was to remember that there are many of us that are already doing this, that it's already begun. The work has already begun, and we ask from the future. And there are many of us who are already living that future, who survived that genocide, who survived that eradication. So we're already here. And so to hear from us, but we might have been on the margins of that. And it's so funny, I can feel myself changed by the future, even how I'm speaking and how I'm moving. So I think that's the thing to remember, is that there are many of us amongst us already who are on the sidelines, who are silenced, who have been demanding resources, who have been demanding, and now it's time that we can move. And so I think it's more about a commitment now. And we heard that too yesterday from the future. It's the commitment. Are you ready to pass your own stipend to somebody else? Are you ready to reallocate your own research budget to somebody else? It's that literal reparations in this moment, that literal passing the mic, that literal stepping back. So I think that's one thing that I just wanted to hold, and to give the future a chance to have a break from saying that, but also passing it back to you in case I misrepresented you.
I hear you, sister. We hear you, sister, and we thank you for doing that remark. And we wish us to do something that we should have done already in the first time by giving our thanks for the Iroquois nation, for the Haudenosaunee, who have been the founding contributors in this process, and apologizing for not having any for the Haudenosaunee nation to give us the permission and give us the proper guidance how they use their knowledge and how they use their prophecies, how they use basis of their government, endemic government system and understanding of the world for our inspiration. Because extracted knowledge stops from understanding that you cannot take the knowledge out of the person who's carrying it. You have to every time sort the knowledge back to the source. And the Western way of knowing, the abstract way of knowing, is like we are accustomed to source the knowledge back to the books or the scientists or the artists that created them. But we are not accustomed of tracing back and giving ownership of such knowledges that traditional knowledge holders have. They don't usually have names, they don't usually have even titles, they are just general indigenous knowledge holders, that they are general Black communities or general women. You cannot use the bodied, still living knowledge without tracing it back to a certain body. And including that body who carries the knowledge is the first step of stopping the extraction of knowledge. Involving that body who carries the knowledge of the way how this knowledge is being used, whether it be a political, artistical, scientific or activistical process. You need to include those bodies. And in order to include those bodies, as my sister from the ancient time was saying, you need to keep those bodies alive. You need to take care of those bodies are keeping alive. And there has been a tendency, especially among the indigenous nations, that let's collect, preserve, interview, or record the knowledges as long as it's possible, because then the ones who have been recording or reserving that knowledge can use it, because you are going to be dying anywhere. After you have disappeared, the ownership of that knowledge is for the ones who have the archive. And that kind of a way of thinking, that awaiting of our slow dying out, of this slow death, is a way of killing us slowly. And extraction knowledge systems, or making shared knowledge bases in a healing, growing and beautiful way, it's somehow very simple. Just start a dialogue, but start a dialogue without your own agenda. Start from the structure saying, hello, my name is Prem, and I come from a Skolsami nation. My mother is a Finn, and I come from a family from the reindeer herders, and I'm the first artist in my generation, or in my family. Who are you? Would there, what kind of languages I'm able to communicate? I speak these languages. And at some points, that communication, building up that dialogue, that is not extractive, it can take years. But if you do that and not start imposing your force, that dialogue can still happen. If it takes 5 years to build that, when it really starts, I can guarantee it is a different way of communicating, that the way that includes the imposition or the expectation that I'm coming here for you because I wish something gaining for you. And when we are talking about marginals or the ones who have no voice, it's so incredible amount of the diversity. What kind of ways of communicating, what kind of ways of knowing are still being excluded? How much of still is being unheard? And instead of concentrating on that we are going to Mars or space, and they don't have to be contradicting processes. But how to build off those communications and dialogues in a way that truly have a possibility of equal stance. That would be the first step from the viewpoint of our we's.
I'd like to add some things to that really important, very, very generous sharing from our we, Pauliina, because there is no entitlement to these gifts you are offering. They're very generous, and the past should be aware of that. I want to thank and greet Suzanne, who I have communed with several times between past and present and have acted in allyship and solidarity with and been supported and backed up by. I want to say that this yesterday, our sharing, and then even our kind of reflections this morning in the group of the future were very difficult, were very tiring, were very emotional for me. And in fact, the repair that has come towards being able to have any kind of conversation around a proposal, which is what is constantly being asked for here, has happened in this closed space between the group of the future, in this BIPOC space that is closed, and in the telepathic, teleconnective chat between our we, Pauliina, and I over the past hour. So, in fact, a proposal that we would like to share that has come out of this closed, private space that is not subjected to an extractive white gaze, which is still present in this gathering, is this. I'm going to share it now in the chat and I'm going to read it. So this is something that Pauliina and I have been chatting about this morning. We propose the IPACC put forward a well-funded board, committee, collective, or ecosystem of Black, Indigenous, and people of color, artists and activists who commune across lines of disability justice, LGBTQI activism, and poor and impoverished communities who are able to meet, and also scattered and displaced communities, I meant to add, who are able to meet for 7 to 10-day retreat every year with all their loved ones in a beautiful sacred place, in partnership with a different host ecology every year, with hot springs and saunas and walks and seeding and composting and workshopping. New futures come out of care and rest and repair. Out of this gathering can come questions, directions, knowledges, needs that ask the IPCC and asks that the IPCC take on board and enacts and centers in their policy moving forwards. As Pauliina wrote to me, where would be the space we could just concentrate on carrying ourselves, not having the whole white load on our backs in order to take even one step. And the last point that I want to share is on language, because I have been working with students the past 3 weeks who I've never met before. And in just 3 weeks of communing together, we have worked our way through the fact that the human does not exist and was invented by political systemic systems to dehumanize and racialize others, to justify genocide and extraction and ecocide, and that those systemic modes of categorization continue today, and in hand with that creation of the human that has been mentioned however many times over the past 3 days. Nature also does not exist and was created in order to justify extraction. These are still words that are being used. Loss and disappearing are still words that are being used. These are innocent, ahistorical languages that directly, that are direct violences to people who have not been lost, knowledges that have not been lost, species that have not disappeared, ice caps that have not decided one day to start melting. They have been forcibly violated and continue to be, and those violences are being re-inflicted by using languages that do not honor the struggles and resistances and perseverances that have continued. Because not only we, this particular species, this iteration of matter, but all matter continues to resist, transform, adapt, find ways to respond to exist in spite of, to exist in resistance to. This is not also a passive mode of extraction. And these labors are what we're talking about, caring, the IPACC creating care for, creating space for, creating resources for, so that out of a potential of sharing and collectivity and pleasure and repair can come these solutions, these proposals that are being asked for.
I think it's really beautiful. Thank you. Thank you, Amma and Pauliina. And I mean, thank you to everyone, because I think it really goes back to the question that also Katya Garcia Anton posted in the chat yesterday, that we should have a list of demands. And I was like I'm really happy about that list of demands, which you actually wrote and just shared. And we were kind of also, like, I think, organizing this event with Bruno, very much aware also of the very problematic nature of what this IPACC could be and what is this structures that the IPCC and also the IPACC acts within. And I think it's very important that we really very seriously, when thinking about the art and climate change, we go back to the art and our system, like, that we need to change also within the art system. So I think that's been, like, again, a very powerful realization of the last 2-3 days. So yeah, I wonder if Bruno has also something to add, or if anyone, of course, from the present and future would like to say something. Before we move forward to some breaks and a more public assembly.
Yeah, maybe I can add to what Inga was saying. One of our main questions was the inherent biases of such structure that we're proposing as an object for discussion in the first place, and our initial uncertainty of putting it forward as being also interpreted as almost like positivating up, I don't know if that word exists, but kind of assuming that the idea was a good one in the first place. So it makes me really happy to go back to this idea of lists of demands that can actually counteract the validity of the idea in the first place, and to put something else on the table instead. That is a bit further away of just following this already existing institutional framework and intergovernmental framework, and is proposing something else as an alternative that can have a relation to that structure, but not completely surrender to it. We have still a couple of minutes, or around 10 minutes, for your last remarks.
Can I?
And then we can go back to a performance and a break.
Sure. I just wanted to offer another proposal as well, that in the spirit of reversing this extractivism, what can we say to each other that we have to offer right in this space? Do you have a retreat where someone who needs to get away from the incessant police violence of London for a week can go to? Do you have paints? Do you have a Patreon that you need someone to contribute to, so that you can keep doing international climate work even though there is no resources for you. So I just want to say, how can we, in this space, you know, we've come to the future asking so much, and can we find a way that within this space we can immediately start offering some things? Do you know research grants that people of color can apply to? Can you help write funding applications? So I just want to make that invitation as well, that while we build this future structure, and that's really difficult sometimes to ask for what you need as well. So that would be something to practice. How can we ask for what we need, and how can we give what we have? Thanks.
Hisham wants to ask a question.
If I just may, also as a member of the present group, I would like to thank you, Amma and Pauliina, most sincerely, and also echo what Suzanne was just now saying. I was yesterday sharing with you a little bit how we work with the initiative for practices and visions of radical care. And actually why we decided to call it radical care is actually to honor what one of the members of the initiative, who is Fabiana X. Souza, an Afro-Brazilian artist living in Paris, who is to change her name de Souza, that was given to her family ancestors who were being enslaved and who belonged to a certain de Souza. She decided to cut it out, and she's calling herself Ex Souza. And she said, you know, radical care is, I'm a fruit of radical care. In Brazil, each 23 minutes, one person that looks like me dies. And for me, being here in front of you within this initiative, caring for each other, exchanging, is a fruit of radical care. So our initiative, at least, is trying to, it doesn't have any resources, so we are not asking for any money. What we try to do is really to meet, to be together, and to listen to each other and see where we can help. And it's really happening on a very small scale. But personally, since I work at Cité des Arts in Paris and I'm working as interdependent curator, what I started to implement is that whenever I'm in jury meetings, whenever I'm curating something, whenever I'm writing about, whenever I'm speaking with people who have resources, I try to make sure that, at least from that group that I know well and that I know what kind of needs they have, I try to distribute what I have. Sometimes it's financially, sometimes it's really by being in the jury and pushing forth. Or for example, for Cité des Arts, we are developing several programs that are directly linked to rethinking politically what it means francophonie, which is such a colonial project and such a project from the past, but giving residencies to the artists that are artists of color and that are critically working on decolonial knowledges, which in France, as I told you also yesterday, is really under threat and under attack. So I would really, as a member of the present group, I would love to take this proposal from the future and be an ally in thinking.
Also, I would like to add something. Thank you so much all for your absolutely honest reflections. And it's a truly important moment. I think also there's a kind of sincerity. We do have to have this conversation. And I believe it's important as well to do this together and to broaden this discussion further into society. I mean, obviously, society is larger than the 50 or 55 people that are here now. I have another question, or not so much a question, but a remark, maybe to the future, to the we AMA. You said something like, why is you said something about the IPCC being hostile. And maybe Suzanne was talking about white supremacy within those structures. I was talking to the IPCC a couple of days ago, to Yuba and to Thelma, And they explained to me that the IPCC, in fact, is not an organization. It's called intergovernmental, but it's under government, but nobody is sort of directing it. The point there is that it's a very small organization of less than 100 people with only 12 scientists, but then thousands of scientists gather and bring in their papers, which are then gathered into a larger document, 5,000, 6,000 pages. None of the vice chairs or the members of the work groups are paid. And I thought, and it's a hard job. So how would that work then within the idea of, I would assume that to be a fairly transparent organization and also maybe also a structure that we could work with or dock into. But perhaps I'm wrong, I don't know. Which organizations can we then trust and which can't we? And how are we able to work together with any governmental entity? Because I believe that this is what's happening right now. Maybe you can, Ama, elaborate a bit on that. Thank you.
Thank you for that. So I am happy to respond, but I also want to open it to Pauliina, Julieta, and Prem also to join this we in responding. I mean, so as I understand, the question is, why is the IPCC a hostile space when it's not an actual body? And then also, who are we supposed to trust and work with? Quite simply, why is this a hostile space? Mm-hmm. Because people, the bodies in this space bring with them conditionings and enactments of patriarchy, white supremacy, and dominant and dominating Western cosmologies of understanding. That has nothing to do with how people see themselves, how people see their politics, how people see their intentions. Patriarchal neocolonial white supremacy is pervasive and everywhere. It lives in my body. Okay. That's why these are hostile spaces. So how do we work with them? We have to work with them. Not everybody has to work with them. Some people just have to be loved and cared for in order to survive. Not everyone has to be in that room. The people who are in that room have to then be extra loved and cared for and survived. They cannot be trusted. My own mind cannot be trusted in this present. It is completely usurped. It's not completely usurped, but there are presences in my own consciousness that I have to constantly decolonize, question. So trust is, again, a red herring. It's not the point. The point is finding, how do we work together in ways that don't eradicate and erode the most violated and oppressed in this community of your present earth? That has to be done by centering care and repair and resources. That money, these millions and billions of dollars and pounds and euros and yen that is the materials we're talking about, is present and needs to be redirected. The issue is not resourcing and the issue is not trust. The issue is, how can we actually have a conversation? Mm-hmm. So we need to talk about what art can do for climate change, or we need to learn from Indigenous people. These are not the right conversations. How can we have the right conversation? How can we resource that conversation? How can you make that happen in collectivity? These are kind of the right conversations to be had. I think it's really important to be practical about what is needed to enable that conversations without sacrificing more racialized peoples and oppressed ecologies. Great,
yeah, that's clear. Thank you for that. it's very important to be aware of your own hostility. Yeah, I understand what you're saying now. Thank you very much. Thank you. Maybe anyone wants to add to that? Bruno, do you?
I think
Yeah.
sorry. Go ahead. Nataša, I just wanted to say something that was in the comments from the future, just to translate that again, just that point around if they don't, if these are non-paid work within the IPCC, what a privilege it is to do unpaid work.
No, for sure. It was the same thing I said to them.
So I think we just have to say, I just wanted to reiterate that because it came from
of
that.
course.
So we just have to visibilize being able.
But Frank wants to say something, but this is the exact question that I had to Yuba, and he said he was working 12 hours a day on the IPCC, but then that creates inequalities by itself, right? Because people that have the money can do this, and people that don't have the money won't be able to do it.
Not to undermine that,
sure.
that devotion and that generosity, but within our communities to do unpaid work, when we're also sending work home, when we're also doing unpaid labour, in response to frontline communities, or the age that we're at. You know, I'm still quite young. I don't have secured accommodation. So we have to think about there is an invisible privilege to do that, even if it's not visible within the sphere that you're in. Just to echo that.
Yeah, Frank, can you?
No, before I want to bring in Pauliina wanted to speak, so please.
Okay, sorry.
Let her come to word.
Sure.
Thank you. We make a small intervention from the future, saying that the ancient form of IPCC, how it was functioning in your time, was that due to the no detachment, to keep the body as objective as possible, no one was paid for that. But to ensure that the scientists were able to make their work, they would have a research body from their home university or some elsewhere they were able to do the actual research work. But that peer reviewing was not paid by the IPCC to guarantee that no one can say that, okay, you were paid. You are making paid decisions. And just quickly to mention about from our point of view about the hostility, it is so much based on the language. We cannot say that, we cannot speak for any Wees on behalf of any Wees, but the hostility is, I understand the questions can be sometimes that are being asked and going back and forth in time. They can be something that are rough in the beginning, and they can be something that we will refine in the course of time. But as the we was referring to, so much of the language that we are using now is lacking the decolonized work that we have done here in the future. And because we need to have some kind of basic set of understanding in order to be communicating. So I would wish that no one of you there sees this acknowledging of this hostility as a personal attack or personal preference.
Sure.
But it's
that's why
the time that has to be invested for the way of finding common language is usually skipped because we are not using time enough for find proper ways of speaking about these matters.
Yes. Thank you, Pauliina, because you're right. It does feel personal, and many people feel that it's personal. Many people feel attacked. When you say the white gaze, people feel attacked. We are at the Jan van Eyck, which has many people from all over the world coming here to reside. But, our team is mainly white. Maastricht is mainly white. If we talk about the white gaze, people feel attacked. So it's important we make each other understand, we have a conversation of what we mean, and to have the tools as well to be aware of structures. If it's looking at ourselves, if it's an internal process, then it's completely clear. Then it's about awareness. And I completely understand that. Which gives me another question to the future. Pauliina, you said that we will not be naming people BIPOC or indigenous. But how can you create, if you have diversity, how can you create this unity then? Is there a possibility to have diversity within unity? It seems to me a very difficult task. Is there a way of people being themselves, being part of a community, being different, but at the same time feel this unity? Can I ask you that, Pauliina?
Yes, my fellow ancestor of the fellow nations, we do not know if we understand your question correctly.
Okay.
But we just wish to share that the way how indigenous knowledges are understood and the knowledge system that indigenous knowledges have is a bit different knowledge system than the Western knowledge system. And in our peer reviewing system, how we evaluate is that indigenous knowledge carrier knowledge valuable or not. It loses its weight if it's detached from its source, the carrier of that knowledge. So we are referring now between two different knowledge systems in a very short period of time, in a very short period of knowing each other. And therefore, maybe instead of trying to point out where your ancestral flaws or mistakes, we are trying to make more specific remarks, completing what you are saying there in the past.
Yeah.
So we don't know if we understood correctly the messages from the past in this very case.
Yeah, I understand.
And what we would say is that we understand that there are difficulties in translating from one state of mind to another. These complexities are philosophical, they are holistic, they are hard to explain. We would refer back to the proposal which was made, which, if we understand correctly, will be implemented, which is not to set up a 3-day situation with extremely limited times to try and discuss the largest issues of our existence, but rather to bring together those people with whose wisdom and knowledge you hope to commune together in a more sustainable setting, one that allows them the time and the context and the opportunity to commune. And I know we do not have that time. I know that our time for this panel and this conversation between present and future is already at an end. But we thank you, present. We thank you, present, for listening to what we have to send back to you and for heeding it. And with that, we will stop.
Thank you. Thank you.
Julieta, do you want to add something? I'm sorry. You're muted.
You're muted.
The one thing I wanted to say in addressing the specific last question is that, of course, there are ways in which culture circulates, right? It's not only about knowledge is being preserved as they are intact, because intact knowledge is dead knowledge. But how do we make sure that our knowledges can interact without violence, without constantly perpetuating these violent processes? So I make a case in point with Latin America, for example, which is the story that I know best. If you would ask the majority of Creolized people in Latin America, bang, go back to be Tupi, go back to be Nahuatl, we would cry because we wouldn't know how to be that. We became something else. And that those syncretic processes which were perpetrated with immense violence, also have a particular value in creating identities. So I want to think that cultures can talk to each other, exchange with each other, become together, right, without the violence. I want to think that those exchanges are possible without making fortified this like fortress culture, like nothing will come in, nothing will come out. This belongs only to me. You will always be only a visitor. I do think that exchanges are possible. Now, what do we do about the violence?
I just want to add, thank you so much for that, Julieta. I just want to add, if you're at a place where listening or hearing people of color talk about the white gaze feels like an attack, you are not ready to talk about climate change. Full stop. You cannot have a conversation, you cannot have an understanding of the world you live in. Full stop. So if Jan van Eyck wants to do this work and they're working in a cosmology of majority whiteness that feels attacked when they hear us talking about the white gaze, that is the work Jan van Eyck needs to do, and they need to do it quickly. They need to do it yesterday.
Thank you, Amma. No comment. I'll leave it at that.
Can I have the camera? So, wow, thank you so much. We ran a little bit over time, but we'll have a short break now, maybe shorter breakout rooms, and then we can gather again at around 4:20 for the assembly. And finally, we can open up also for the questions of the Zoom audience and everyone else who's watching on YouTube and Vimeo. Some people requested to talk from the audience. If I could ask to wait a little bit further.
Bruno,
yeah.
Wait, can I add something?
Yeah, sure.
Just to comment, because in relation to what Amma said and what I think I lost everyone else.
But we can hear you, Inga.
Okay.
Yeah.
To what Amma has said and Pauliina, and also what Prem mentioned about this gathering kind of being really quick and in a way trying to solve these really huge issues and in a way that it did and in a language that it used. But also I'm just thinking that indeed, to refer back to something that Nataša Petrešin-Bachelez said yesterday in the very beginning, when she said that like Jan van Eyck is a residency program, and in a way it's run in a certain way that it's been running, but still it is maybe one of those resources really that can actually be this place for this retreat and for these longer conversations and kind of overcoming, different sort of fears or anxieties of being attacked and actually kind of really deeply understanding like what is the situation that has brought us there. So I think actually that that there is that potential within that space, even and I think and I really hope that that will continue these conversations and that sort of opening up of this space for a longer time, which actually is more caring for the bodies that it invites. And so thank you everyone, and let's regather after some moments.